Before the rise of the Mongol Empire, the vast steppes of Central Asia were inhabited by a variety of nomadic tribes. These groups, such as the Naimans, Merkits, Kirites, and the Mongols themselves, lived in constant conflict, competing for fertile pastures and essential resources for the survival of their herds. Life on the steppes was harsh and unforgiving, shaped by extreme weather and the need for constant mobility. These tribes shared a culture centered around warfare, hunting, and an economy primarily focused on horse breeding and other livestock. The clan system dominated their social structures, where warrior leaders, or khans, took control through alliances and, often, betrayals in battles. The region was a crossroads between great empires, such as the Jin dynasty to the north and the Muslim Khwarezm to the west. However, despite the proximity to more centralized and organized civilizations, the steppe nomads led a life without cities or fixed borders. They were known for their skills in archery and cavalry, techniques that, centuries later, would be crucial to the rapid expansion of the future empire. Amidst the turbulent landscape of the Mongol steppes, in the year 1162, Temujin was born, the son of Yesugei, leader of the Kiat-Borjigan tribe, one of the many Mongol factions. Temujin was born near the Onon River, in a region that is now part of modern Mongolia, and from the beginning, his life was marked by tragedies and challenges. His name was a foreshadowing of his destiny. He was named after an enemy tribal leader whom his father had defeated just before his birth. Temujin's childhood was shaped by a series of events that would solidify his future determination and ruthlessness. As a young boy, his father was poisoned by the rival Tatar tribe, leaving Temujin and his family in an extremely vulnerable position. With Yesugei's death, Temujin's family was abandoned by their own clan and left to survive alone on the steppes, a betrayal that deeply scarred the young Temujin. His mother, Hoelun, a woman of remarkable resilience, took on the task of keeping the family alive under harsh conditions, feeding them on roots and small animals hunted in the area. These early years shaped Temujin, teaching him the hard lessons of betrayal, survival, and the necessity of strategic alliances. Even in his youth, he began to show a strong sense of leadership and military prowess, organizing his brothers to protect the family and starting to gather loyal followers. Another crucial episode in his youth was his capture and enslavement by his rivals, the Merkits, who held him prisoner for a period. Temujin's escape from captivity is often seen as the beginning of his rise to power, as it was after this event that he began to form alliances with other tribal leaders, such as Togrul, the Khan of the Kirites, and his childhood friend, Jamuka. However, his alliance with Jamuka would be temporary, as the two friends soon became rivals, setting the stage for the conflict that would determine the fate of the Mongol tribes. After years of battles, alliances, and betrayals, Temujin was ready to achieve one of the most impressive feats in history, the unification of the Mongol tribes. The early 13th century was a period of great fragmentation among the steppe tribes. Groups such as the Naimans, Merkits, Kirites, Tatars, and many others, traditional rivals, maintained constant warfare for supremacy and resources. The Temujin's rise to power began with his victory over the Merkits, a tribe that had kidnapped his wife, Berta. This personal revenge boosted his reputation as a ruthless leader and inspired many warriors to join his ranks. Gradually, through his strategic skills and ability to forge powerful alliances, Temujin began to consolidate power. He received crucial support from Togrul, the Khan of the Kirites, and used his temporary friendship with Jamuka to strengthen his position. However, the relationship between Temujin and Jamuka, once one of friendship, soon turned into rivalry. In 1186, Jamuka proclaimed himself Gur Khan, or Universal Khan, and opposed Temujin, sparking a long and violent conflict. The war culminated in the Battle of the Seven Tribes in 1187, where Temujin was defeated. However, unlike other tribal leaders who gave up after failure, Temujin used this defeat as an opportunity to reshape his strategies. He began to adopt a meritocratic approach in his army, promoting men based on skill and loyalty rather than family ties, which was uncommon among the steppe tribes. Over the years, Temujin gradually defeated one rival tribe after another, absorbing their warriors and consolidating his power. His vision was not merely to lead a single clan, but to unify all of Mongolia under one banner. In 1201, after defeating a coalition formed by the Naimans and Tatars, Temujin gained notoriety as a leader capable of unifying the disorganized society of the steppes. Finally, in 1206, after a series of decisive victories, and with the support of the leading Mongol tribes, Temujin convened a Kurultai, a grand assembly of Mongol tribes. In this historic gathering, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title that symbolized his supreme authority and meant universal ruler, or Khan of the world. This moment marked the birth of the Mongol Empire. With the unification of the Mongol tribes in 1206, Genghis Khan understood that to maintain control over the vast territory and prevent the disintegration of the society he had built, it was necessary to establish a solid governance system. It was in this context that he instituted the Yasa, a set of laws and codes designed to regulate life in the newly formed Mongol Empire. The Yasa was not only a legal code, but also a moral and social guide, shaping the behavior and duties of all members of the empire, from the warriors to the conquered populations. The Yasa was kept secret, recited and interpreted only by officials close to Genghis Khan, but its impact was profound across Mongol society. The Yasa was based on loyalty, discipline, equality, and justice. One of the pillars of this code was the idea of meritocracy, something Genghis Khan had already implemented in his army, promoting warriors based on their competence rather than their lineage. The code was also ruthless when it came to treason and disloyalty. The punishment for these crimes was death without exception, creating a strict control among tribal leaders and generals, minimizing internal fragmentation. Another important aspect of the Yasa was equality among all members of the empire, regardless of their social or ethnic origin. Although the Mongols were the dominant group, Genghis Khan allowed his subjects, especially those from advanced civilizations like the Chinese and Persians, to contribute their knowledge and skills. This helped to create a multicultural empire, where everyone was governed by the same rules. In the social sphere, the Yasa protected the weakest. Women, children, and the elderly, for example, could not be attacked or harmed. The code also regulated the treatment of prisoners of war, establishing limits on looting and the treatment of captives, although Genghis Khan and his successors were still known for brutal acts in military campaigns. The code also strictly regulated military life, one of the main pillars of the empire's stability. The Mongol warriors, known for their extreme mobility and skill in horseback archery, were efficiently organized under the Yasa. Desertion, disobedience, and unauthorized looting were crimes severely punished, ensuring the cohesion that was crucial to Mongol conquests. The Yasa reinforced the military hierarchy, with each soldier knowing exactly his role within the organization. The army was divided into units of 10 men, Arban, 100, Zun, 1,000, Mingan, and 10,000, Tumen, and this organization was applied not only on the battlefield, but also in civil society. The collection of tributes, the administration of conquered lands, and the preservation of internal order were equally controlled by the Yasa. To ensure the system's efficiency, Genghis Khan also established the Yam, an extremely effective communication network composed of postal stations spread throughout the empire. This network allowed messages and orders to travel quickly between different parts of the empire, facilitating centralized administration. Genghis Khan demonstrated remarkable pragmatism in dealing with religious matters. The Yasa guaranteed religious freedom throughout the empire, something uncommon at the time. Genghis believed that respecting the religious practices of his subjects would help avoid revolts and promote loyalty among the different ethnicities and cultures within his borders. This policy made the Mongol Empire a place where Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists, and shamans could coexist in relative peace. By not imposing an official religion, Genghis Khan ensured that his government remained focused on political and military cohesion rather than religious disputes. With the unification of the Mongol tribes and the establishment of the Yasa, Genghis Khan was prepared to expand his empire beyond the borders of the Central Asian steppes. His first major target was the Jin Empire, which dominated northern China. The Jin Empire, ruled by the Jurchen people, was an established power, with vast armies, a developed society, and powerful fortifications. However, internal rivalries and corruption weakened the central authority, creating an opportunity that Genghis Khan was quick to exploit. The campaign against the Jin was not merely a quest for territorial conquest. It was motivated by several strategic and personal issues. The Jin had exercised dominant influence over the Mongol tribes, exacting tribute and imposing their will on the steppes for decades. For Genghis Khan, the war against the Jin was, in part, a form of revenge and a declaration of complete independence from Chinese domination. Furthermore, the fertile lands and wealthy cities of northern China offered an irresistible allure. The Jin Empire controlled important trade routes, including sections of the Silk Road, and its cities held enormous wealth, from silk and porcelain to agricultural resources. By conquering these areas, Genghis Khan would not only expand his empire but also gain direct control over these vital trade routes. In 1211, Genghis Khan launched his first campaign against the Jin Empire. His army, highly mobile and disciplined, crossed the Gobi Desert and invaded Jin territory. Although the Jin had a numerically superior army, with heavy cavalry and well-equipped infantry, they were unprepared to face the Mongols' style of warfare. The Mongols were masters of mobile warfare, employing surprise tactics, swift sieges, and an extremely effective communication system. The first major battle took place at the Yahuling Pass, a strategic point in the mountains that the Jin believed was impossible for a large army to cross. However, Genghis Khan once again demonstrated his tactical genius. He sent a small attack force to simulate a retreat, while a larger force attacked from an unexpected route, surrounding the Jin armies and inflicting heavy losses. This tactic, known as the feigned retreat, became a trademark of the Mongol army. After this initial victory, the Mongols advanced deeper into Jin territory, surrounding and sacking several cities. One of the Mongols' main strategies was to besiege fortified cities and cut off their supplies, weakening their defenses over time. Cities like Datong and Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, were targeted by these sieges. The siege of Zhongdu was particularly brutal, with the city subjected to months of isolation before finally falling in 1215. Genghis Khan demonstrated ruthless pragmatism in dealing with the inhabitants of conquered cities. While some cities that surrendered were spared from total destruction, others that resisted faced devastating consequences. The Mongols gained a reputation for cruelty, but this tactic of instilling fear proved effective, forcing many other cities to surrender without fighting. With the victory over the Jin, Genghis Khan consolidated control over northern China, greatly expanding the Mongol territory. More importantly, he acquired wealth and resources that fueled the growth of his empire. The siege engineering skills of the Jin, for example, were adopted by the Mongols and would prove invaluable in future campaigns against fortified cities in Persia and Europe. Moreover, Genghis Khan secured control over strategic parts of the Silk Road, increasing the flow of goods and tribute to his empire. This control not only enriched the empire, but also placed it at the center of intercontinental trade, connecting the east to the west. After victories against the Jin in northern China, Genghis Khan turned his attention westward, targeting a region of great strategic and commercial importance, the Khwarezm Empire. Located in the area corresponding to modern Iran, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. The Khwarezm Empire was a rising power, with vast cities, commercial wealth, and control over key sections of the Silk Road. The ruler of this empire was the ambitious and self-assured Sultan Muhammad II, whose reckless actions would lead to one of the most brutal and decisive campaigns in Mongol history. The initial relationship between the Mongol Empire and Khwarezm was not hostile. In 1218, Genghis Khan sought to establish trade ties with Khwarezm, sending caravans loaded with goods and an official embassy to negotiate trade and diplomatic agreements. For Genghis Khan, expanding trade was as important as territorial conquests, as he understood that controlling trade routes could enrich his empire and facilitate future domination. However, the Mongols' good intentions were met with suspicion and hostility by Sultan Muhammad II. When a Mongol caravan arrived at the border city of Otrar, it was intercepted by the local governor, who accused the merchants of being spies. The merchants were imprisoned and executed in defiance of the trade agreements the Mongols were trying to establish. Genghis Khan, instead of reacting immediately with violence, chose to send another diplomatic mission to the Sultan, demanding the release of the prisoners and the punishment of the governor of Otrar. The Sultan, however, not only ignored the request but also ordered the execution of the Mongol envoys. This act was one of the most catastrophic mistakes of his life, as dishonoring ambassadors was seen as an unforgivable insult by Genghis Khan. The attack on the caravans and the execution of the ambassadors gave Genghis Khan the pretext to launch a military campaign of vengeance. In 1219, he mobilized his army and set out to destroy the Khwarezm Empire, with a ferocity that would shock the world. The Mongols split into several columns, moving swiftly and unpredictably across the steppes and deserts of Central Asia. Genghis Khan's strategy was to attack from multiple directions simultaneously, confusing and overwhelming the Sultan's army. He sent his generals Subutai and Jebe on a separate mission to encircle the enemy from the west, while Genghis himself led the main assault from the east. The first city to fall under the Mongol assault was Otrar, where the original offense against the Mongol merchants had taken place. The siege of Otrar lasted 5 months, but the Mongols, with their superior siege tactics and relentless patience, eventually captured the city in 1220. The governor of Otrar, who had executed the merchants, was handed over to Genghis Khan and was killed in a brutal manner, symbolizing Genghis's personal vengeance. After the fall of Otrar, the Mongols advanced to other major cities in Khwarezm, including Bukhara and Samarkand, both located along the Silk Road and among the most important centers of the empire. Bukhara was besieged and quickly conquered, and Genghis Khan entered the city in triumph. In one of his most symbolic acts, Genghis Khan ascended the minaret of the great mosque of Bukhara and declared, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The city of Samarkand was the jewel of the Khwarezm Empire, known for its rich culture, markets, and imposing fortifications. When the Mongols surrounded the city, the resistance was fierce but insufficient in the face of the Mongols' experience and brutality. The Mongols again used their siege tactics, including setting up a network of spies and misinformation inside the city to undermine its defense. Samarkand fell after a siege of only 5 days. The Mongols, furious at the resistance they encountered, inflicted massive destruction on the city. The population was punished, and thousands of artisans and skilled workers were deported to other regions of the empire, where their abilities would be used for the benefit of the Mongols. As the Mongols destroyed city after city, Sultan Muhammad II, instead of confronting Genghis Khan on the battlefield, chose to flee from one city to another. Unable to organize an effective defense and fearing for his life, he eventually fled to a small island in the Caspian Sea, where he died of natural causes in 1220, leaving his empire at the mercy of the Mongol destruction. With the death of Muhammad II, his son, Jalal al-Din, attempted to reorganize the remaining forces of Khwarezm. He managed to assemble an army and achieve some isolated victories against the Mongols, such as at the Battle of the Indus River in 1221, where he defeated a smaller Mongol force. However, Jalal al-Din was soon forced to flee, being pursued by Subutai and Jebe through Persia and Afghanistan. Jalal al-Din continued to resist for a few years, but without the support and resources of his destroyed empire, he could never reclaim control of Khwarezm. He was eventually defeated and killed, ending the organized resistance against the Mongols in the region. The campaign against the Khwarezm Empire was one of the most destructive in the history of the Mongol Empire. The impact was devastating. Major cities were destroyed, populations were enslaved or dispersed, and the Khwarezm Empire was effectively wiped off the map. For Genghis Khan, this victory secured control over a vast region, paving the way for future campaigns in Persia, the Caucasus, and even Europe. The destruction of the Khwarezm Empire also served as a grim warning to other nations and city-states considering resistance against the Mongols. The terror that Genghis Khan inflicted on his enemies was not just a tool for revenge, but a calculated strategy to prevent resistance in future campaigns. In 1221, Genghis Khan decided to send two of his best generals, Subutai and Jebi, on a major expedition to Persia and the surrounding regions, with the aim of expanding the empire beyond the borders of Khwarezm. The Mongol campaign in Persia was characterized by a series of swift and fierce attacks on cities and fortresses, where the Mongols used the tactics they had successfully employed in previous campaigns. Along the route, cities that resisted were destroyed with ruthless force, while those that surrendered were spared and incorporated into the empire. However, the Mongols' policy of continuous terror and destruction discouraged resistance, and vast regions quickly fell under their control. One of the first major victories of the campaign was the capture of the city of Rai, a vital center in Persia. Rai, which today is part of Tehran, was one of the largest and wealthiest urban centers in the region. The Mongol army devastated the city as part of their strategy to punish any region that resisted. The destruction of Rai echoed throughout Iran, leading other cities to reconsider their resistance. After the campaign in Persia, Subutai and Jebi turned their forces toward the Caucasus, a mountainous and strategically important region located between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. The Caucasus had always been a culturally diverse and politically fragmented region, inhabited by various ethnic groups, including Georgians, Alans, Circassians, and other Caucasian peoples. Despite this fragmentation, the Mongols would face significant resistance from the combined forces of the region. One of the key events of this phase of the campaign was the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223. Although this battle took place on the steppes north of the Caucasus, it was directly linked to Subutai and Jebi's western campaign. The Mongols, in a masterful maneuver of cavalry tactics, defeated a combined force of Kievan Rus and Cumans, who had allied to try to stop the Mongol advance. As they advanced through the Caucasus, Subutai and Jebi encountered strong resistance from the Georgians, who led a prosperous and militarily robust Christian kingdom. Under the command of King George IV, the Georgians had expanded their kingdom in the Caucasus and were known for their well-equipped and trained troops. However, the Georgian army was unable to withstand the Mongols' superior tactics. The highly mobile Mongol cavalry used their traditional strategy of feigned retreat, only to encircle and destroy the Georgian forces in open terrain. Several Georgian cities and fortresses fell into Mongol hands, and the kingdom, once one of the strongest in the region, was devastated. After the death of George IV, Georgian resistance was finally crushed, and the Caucasus became another province of the expanding Mongol Empire. The conquest of Persia and the Caucasus was a milestone in Mongol military dominance. The skill of generals Subutai and Jebi, as well as the Mongols' adaptation to the diverse terrain, from deserts to mountains, demonstrated their military versatility. This campaign also made it clear that the Mongols had no intention of stopping in Central Asia. Their goal was total domination of the lands to the west. But in 1227, the course of the Mongol Empire's history took a significant turn with the death of its founder and greatest leader, Genghis Khan. After decades of conquest that led to the formation of the largest contiguous land empire in history, Genghis Khan's death marked the end of an era, but not the immediate decline of the empire. His death raised questions about succession and the future of expansion campaigns. But Genghis Khan's legacy and the governance system he established ensured the continuity of Mongol power for many decades. Genghis Khan spent his last years in active military campaigns, particularly in an attempt to subdue the Tangut dynasty in China. This campaign was the last major campaign personally led by Genghis Khan. The Shisha had refused to provide military aid to the Mongols during the campaigns against the Jin and the Khwarezmian empires, which Genghis considered an unforgivable insult. Determined to punish this betrayal, he launched a devastating attack against the kingdom, sacking its cities and imposing his control over the territory. During this campaign, however, Genghis Khan suffered a fall from his horse, which left him gravely injured. There are various accounts regarding what actually caused his death. Some sources suggest that he succumbed to the injuries from the fall, while others point to illness or even assassination, though no concrete evidence exists. What is known is that in August 1227, Genghis Khan died during the final siege against the Shisha kingdom. A particularly intriguing aspect of Genghis Khan's death was the extreme secrecy that surrounded the event. To avoid any possibility of disorder or demoralization within the Mongol army, his death was kept secret until the campaign against the Shisha was concluded. After the fall of the last Shisha stronghold, the Mongol army completely destroyed the kingdom and its written records. The Shisha kingdom disappeared from history almost entirely, with only remnants surviving to this day. This total destruction served as Genghis Khan's final act of vengeance against his enemies, a reminder that treachery against the great Khan would never be forgotten, even after his death. Genghis Khan's death is also shrouded in mystery regarding his burial. According to Mongol tradition and historical accounts, Genghis Khan requested to be buried in secret, in a location known only to a few who transported his body. It is said that these soldiers were killed after the burial to ensure that the tomb's location remained unknown. The location of Genghis Khan's tomb remains one of the greatest mysteries in archaeology. Various expeditions over the centuries have tried to locate his grave, but without success. There are several theories about where he was buried, from Burkhan Mountain, a sacred place for the Mongols, to remote valleys in the steppes. However, the secrecy surrounding his tomb symbolizes the deep respect his followers had for him, and the desire to preserve his memory as something transcendent and untouchable. The death of Genghis Khan also raised the issue of succession, something he had planned in advance. During his lifetime, he had designated his third son, Ogedei, as his successor, a decision that was ratified in a Kurultai tribal assembly before his death. Although Genghis had other influential sons, such as Jochi, Chagatai, and Tolui, the choice of Ogedei was based on his balanced nature and his administrative capabilities, qualities that Genghis believed were crucial to maintaining the unity of the empire. To ensure a peaceful transition of power, Genghis Khan had established a system of territorial divisions among his sons, but kept the central authority with the Great Khan. Jochi, the eldest son, was given responsibility for lands to the north and west, including the regions of the Golden Horde, while Chagatai, known for his strong temperament, was given control of Central Asia. Ogedei, in addition to being named Great Khan, was tasked with overseeing the central lands of Mongolia and China. Tolui, the youngest son, inherited the heartland of Mongolia and the empire's military forces. This system of territorial partition allowed different branches of the family to control large areas semi-autonomously, but always under the supervision of the Great Khan, a model that would be followed for generations. The death of Genghis Khan marked the end of an era, but the impact of his actions and conquest would endure for centuries. He not only created the largest contiguous empire in history, but also revolutionized warfare, governance, and trade. Under the leadership of Ogedei Khan, the Mongol Empire continued its expansion, now targeting Western Asia and Eastern Europe. Between 1236 and 1242, Mongol armies, led by Batu Khan and the legendary general Subutai, undertook one of the most devastating and decisive campaigns in Mongol history, the invasion of Eastern Europe. This campaign resulted in the destruction of major cities, the collapse of several regional powers, and the establishment of the Golden Horde, which would dominate Russia and much of Eastern Europe for centuries. Batu Khan was the grandson of Genghis Khan and the son of Jochi, Genghis Khan's eldest son. After his father's death, Batu inherited vast portions of the empire's western territories, and Ogedei Khan assigned him the task of leading the expansion campaign into Europe. Alongside Batu was the brilliant strategist Subutai, who had already played crucial roles in the campaigns against the Khwarezm Empire and the Caucasus. This military partnership would result in one of the most impressive conquests of the Mongol army. The goal of Batu and Subutai was not just looting or territorial expansion, but also to subdue the kingdoms of Eastern Europe, exploit trade routes, and consolidate power over the steppes connecting Asia to Europe. Beskaya Hyorstayi, the Mongol invasion of Kievan Rus, a collection of Slavic principalities centered around city-states such as Kiev, Novgorod, and Vladimir, began in 1236. This region was vulnerable due to its political fragmentation, and the Mongols took advantage of this disunity to advance rapidly. The campaign against Kievan Rus was devastating and relentless. The first major city to fall was Ryazan in 1237. The Mongols, using siege tactics and their notorious cavalry, completely destroyed the city and its fortifications. After Ryazan, the Mongols marched north, capturing and devastating other major cities, such as Kolomna and Moscow. The city of Vladimir, one of the main capitals of Kievan Rus at the time, was surrounded and taken in 1238. The Mongols launched an unrelenting assault, destroying the city and much of its population, including members of the Prince of Vladimir's family. After the fall of Vladimir, the Mongols continued their devastating march through Russian cities. They attempted to take Novgorod, but due to the difficult swampy terrain around the city and the harsh winter, they opted to withdraw before taking the city, although Novgorod was later forced to pay tribute. Following the conquest of Russian cities, Batu and Subutai turned their attention westward, toward Poland and Hungary, two kingdoms they believed could resist the Mongol advance. In 1241, the Mongols launched an invasion on two fronts. Subutai led an attack to the north, advancing toward Poland, while Batu commanded the southern attack focused on Hungary. In April 1241, Subutai's Mongol forces clashed with a combined European army of Poles, Germans, and Teutonic Knights at the Battle of Legnica. The Christian army, led by Duke Henry II of Silesia, was crushed by the Mongols' superior tactics. The Mongols used their characteristic tactic of a feigned retreat, confusing the Polish army, which, upon pursuing the seemingly retreating Mongols, was ambushed and destroyed. Duke Henry II himself was killed in battle, and the Mongol victory left Central Europe vulnerable to invasion. Meanwhile, Batu led the southern attack on the Kingdom of Hungary, resulting in the Battle of Mohi in April 1241, one of the most devastating battles of the Mongol invasion. King Balathor of Hungary had gathered a large army to confront the Mongols, but, like in Legnica, the Hungarian forces were completely overwhelmed. Using their light cavalry, mobility, and siege tactics, the Mongols broke through Hungarian defenses and annihilated much of the army. After the victory at Mohi, the Mongols sacked several Hungarian cities, including the capital, Buda, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. King Balathor fled to Croatia, where he sought refuge until the Mongols withdrew their forces. Despite their overwhelming victories throughout Eastern Europe, the Mongol invasion suddenly stopped in 1242. This occurred due to the death of Ogedei Khan in December 1241. According to Mongol traditions, Batu and other leaders had to return to Mongolia to participate in the Kurultai that would elect the next great Khan. This decision, though it spared Western Europe from a possible invasion, did not mark the end of Mongol dominance in the region. The territories conquered by the Mongols in Russia, the southern steppes, and Eastern Europe were organized under Batu Khan's rule, forming the Golden Horde. This Khanate, which included much of Russia and the steppes north of the Caspian and Black Seas, became one of the most powerful divisions of the Mongol Empire and would have a lasting influence on the history of Russia and Eastern Europe. The Mongol invasion of Eastern Europe had long-lasting consequences for the region. Kievan Rus, which had previously dominated the political and cultural landscape of the Eastern Slavs, was fragmented and weakened, facilitating the rise of the Grand Duchy of Moscow as the future dominant power in the region. Under the rule of the Golden Horde, the Russian principalities were forced to pay tribute to the Mongols, and this control lasted until the 15th century, when the Russians finally freed themselves from Mongol rule. In Central Europe, the invasion caused panic and devastation, but it also led to a reorganization of defenses and policies. The kingdoms of Poland and Hungary were weakened by the destruction, but began to rebuild after the Mongol withdrawal. The memory of the Mongol incursions left a lasting trauma in the local populations, and for generations, the fear of another invasion remained alive. The establishment of the Golden Horde by Batu Khan was one of the most important legacies of the Mongol invasion. Batu set up his government in the city of Sarai, on the banks of the Volga River, and organized a semi-autonomous system of rule, where he and his descendants would govern the Russian lands as part of the Mongol Empire, but with significant independence. The Golden Horde became a regional power. mediating trade between the East and the West and ensuring political stability in the steppes and lands north of the Black Sea. After the death of Ögedei Khan in 1241, the Mongol Empire entered a period of political uncertainty. Although Ögedei had consolidated his father Genghis Khan's power, the issue of succession was not completely resolved. During this vulnerable time, Ögedei's widow, Turagene Khatun, assumed regency, ruling from 1241 to 1246. During this period, she worked to ensure that her son, Guyuk Khan, would be the next to occupy the throne of the Great Khan. In 1246, after intense political and diplomatic maneuvering, Guyuk was elected at the Kurultai. However, his ascension to the throne was far from unanimous. Tensions within Genghis Khan's family, which had been building for years, began to intensify. Batu Khan, leader of the Golden Horde and Genghis Khan's grandson, was one of the most powerful and influential Mongol leaders, controlling vast territories in the western part of the empire. Although Batu initially supported Guyuk's election, the relationship between the two quickly deteriorated. Guyuk, determined to consolidate his power, viewed Batu as a direct threat. Batu, on the other hand, exercised great autonomy over his lands and saw no need to submit to Guyuk's centralized authority. The tension between the two became evident when Guyuk began planning a military expedition to subjugate Batu and impose his authority over the Golden Horde. However, Guyuk never managed to realize his plans, as his reign was interrupted before they could come to fruition. Despite these divisions, Guyuk attempted to reassert central control over the vast empire. He appointed new governors in strategic regions such as Persia and China, seeking to replace local leaders who might oppose his rule. Additionally, Guyuk maintained diplomatic relations with the West. In 1246, he received an embassy sent by Pope Innocent IV Tiers, led by the missionary Giovanni da Pian del Carpine. Although the Pope sought to establish ties with the Mongols, Guyuk responded with a letter demanding submission, reflecting the tone of superiority with which the Mongols treated foreign rulers. And in 1248, while marching with his army to confront Batu Khan, Guyuk died suddenly. The circumstances of his death are uncertain. Although some sources claim he died of natural causes, others suggest he may have been poisoned, possibly as a result of the intrigues and conspiracies that dominated the Mongol court. After Guyuk Khan's death in 1248, the Mongol Empire entered another period of instability, with disputes among the factions of Genghis Khan's family. Tensions increased, particularly between the descendants of Ögedei and Tolui, until, in 1251, Mongol Khan, the son of Tolui and grandson of Genghis Khan, was elected Great Khan, marking the beginning of a new phase of expansion and consolidation of the empire. Mongol Khan, in addition to being a military leader, was an efficient administrator. He recognized that the vast Mongol Empire needed a more cohesive and centralized administration to avoid internal fragmentation. During his reign, he reformed the tax system, creating a more organized method of tax collection throughout the empire. He also sought to combat corruption, which had spread since the reign of Ögedei, and appointed new officials to oversee the work of local administrators. These reforms helped increase the empire's efficiency, ensuring that wealth flowed more consistently to the Mongol center of power. At the same time, Mongol encouraged the construction of infrastructure, such as roads and bridges, which facilitated trade and communication between the various regions of the empire. This was essential for maintaining control over such a vast and diverse territory. Mongol's reign was also marked by major military campaigns, the most significant being the expansion into the Middle East, led by his brother Hulagu Khan. Mongol tasked Hulagu with a grand mission to expand the Mongol Empire into Persia, the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, and eventually the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. In 1255, Hulagu set out for the Middle East with a large army, aiming to subjugate the peoples of the region and consolidate Mongol dominance over Iran and Mesopotamia. Hulagu's campaign began with the destruction of the Assassins, a Shia Ismaili sect that controlled mountain fortresses in northern Iran. Through a series of successful sieges, Hulagu eliminated the assassin threat, capturing their fortresses and destroying their leaders. After defeating the Assassins, Hulagu advanced toward the Abbasid Caliphate, one of the most important centers of the Islamic world. Baghdad, the capital of the Caliphate, was a wealthy and powerful city, and its capture would symbolize the height of Mongol power in the region. In January 1258, Hulagu besieged Baghdad, which was then governed by Caliph al-Mustasim. Despite Hulagu's demands for surrender, the Caliph resisted, underestimating the Mongol power. The siege of Baghdad in 1258 was one of the most notorious conquests of Hulagu's campaign and one of the most devastating moments in the history of the Middle East. The Mongol army surrounded the city, and after weeks of fighting, broke through its defenses, entering the city in February 1258. Thousands of inhabitants were killed, and the city was completely sacked. Hulagu ordered the execution of Caliph al-Mustasim, effectively ending the Abbasid Caliphate as a political entity. The destruction of Baghdad marked the end of an era for the Islamic world. The city, which for centuries had been a cultural, intellectual, and economic center of the Muslim world, never fully recovered its former glory. The Mongol sack destroyed libraries, mosques, and infrastructure that were fundamental to the development of Islamic civilization. After the fall of Baghdad, Hulagu continued his campaign toward the Levant, advancing through the lands of Syria and Palestine. In 1260, the Mongols captured Aleppo and marched toward Damascus, which also fell without much resistance. The conquest of these cities strengthened Mongol control in the region, leading many local leaders to swear allegiance to Hulagu. However, the Mongol expansion in the Middle East was halted in 1260, when the Mongols faced the Mamluks of Egypt. The Mamluk army, led by Sultan Qutuz, gathered to face the Mongols in the Battle of Ain Jalut in September 1260. This battle was significant because, for the first time, the Mongols suffered a decisive defeat. Hulagu was not present at the battle, as he had returned to Persia due to the death of Mongol, and the Mongol forces were defeated by the Mamluks, marking the end of Mongol expansion in the Levant. While Hulagu continued his campaigns in the Middle East, Mongol Khan was engaged in a war against the Song dynasty in China. In 1259, during the siege of a city in the region, Mongol contracted an illness and died suddenly, interrupting his expansion plans. His death, like that of his predecessors, triggered a new succession crisis, putting the continuation of Mongol expansion into question. After Mongol Khan's death in 1259, the Mongol Empire entered a succession crisis. Brothers Kublai and Arik Boka contested the throne, sparking a civil war that lasted from 1260 to 1264. Kublai, who had already demonstrated great skill as a ruler and military leader in China, was proclaimed Great Khan at a Kurultai in 1260, while Arik Boka held his own Kurultai in Mongolia, challenging his brother's power. The conflict between the two brothers reflected deeper divisions within the empire. Kublai, who governed from China, represented a faction that supported the integration of sedentary cultures, especially Chinese culture, while Arik Boka defended traditional Mongol nomadic customs. After 4 years of battles, Kublai managed to defeat Arik Boka in 1264, consolidating his position as the legitimate Great Khan. With his victory, Kublai shifted the center of power to China. He founded the Yuan dynasty in 1271, becoming Emperor of China and establishing his capital in Khanbalik, Beijing. This marked the beginning of a new era, in which the Mongol Empire transitioned from a nomadic confederation to a centralized empire heavily influenced by Chinese culture. Kublai quickly adapted to Chinese traditions, adopting the Confucian bureaucratic system and promoting reforms that ensured the stability and prosperity of his rule. He also strengthened the trade routes of the Silk Road, promoting cultural and economic exchange between the East and the West. Although Kublai was nominally the Great Khan of the entire Mongol Empire, in practice, his authority was more concentrated in China. The other Khanates, the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, and the Chagatai Khanate, began to operate more independently, fragmenting the empire. Nonetheless, Kublai maintained his focus on the unification and consolidation of China, defeating the Song dynasty in 1279 and completing the unification of Chinese territory under Mongol rule. During Kublai Khan's reign, the Mongol Empire had expanded to become one of the largest in history, controlling vast regions of China, Central Asia, and the Middle East. Ambitious and determined to consolidate his dominance, Kublai turned his attention to Japan, a territory he hoped to subjugate to Mongol power. In 1266, Kublai Khan sent emissaries to Japan, demanding that the Japanese emperor submit to his authority. However, the Kamakura shogunate, which effectively controlled Japan at the time, ignored these demands. Furious with this refusal, Kublai planned a large-scale invasion to force Japan into submission. The first invasion was launched in 1274. A fleet of about 900 ships was sent from the Korean peninsula, composed of approximately 25,000 to 30,000 soldiers, including Mongol, Chinese, and Korean troops. The Mongol army landed in Hakata Bay on the island of Kyushu and encountered resistance from the Japanese samurai. However, the Mongols, with their cavalry tactics and archery, quickly overwhelmed the Japanese defenders in open combat, utilizing gunpowder bombs and other advanced weaponry. Despite their initial success, the Mongols struggled to maintain the territory they had captured. A sudden storm, described by the Japanese as a kamikaze, or divine wind, hit the Mongol fleet during the night, causing significant damage and forcing the invading forces to retreat. Many of the ships were destroyed, and thousands of Mongol soldiers drowned. The invasion failed, and the Mongols returned to China, but the defeat did not end Kublai Khan's ambitions. Determined to correct the mistakes of the first invasion, the Mongols spent several years planning a second offensive against Japan. In 1281, Kublai Khan organized a new invasion, this time on a much larger scale. He assembled a fleet of over 4,000 ships and an army of about 140,000 soldiers, including Mongol, Chinese, and Korean troops, divided into two main forces, one departing from Korea and the other from southern China. The Mongols planned a coordinated attack, but logistical and communication problems delayed the unification of the two forces. While the Korean fleet reached Japan in mid-June, the Chinese force was delayed by several weeks. Meanwhile, the Japanese defenders, already aware of the impending threat, strengthened their defenses, building walls along the coast of Kyushu and mobilizing thousands of samurai warriors. When the Mongol forces finally attacked, they were again confronted by the samurai, who, though outnumbered, managed to inflict significant casualties on the invaders. Once again, nature intervened. In August 1281, a powerful typhoon struck the waters around Kyushu, destroying much of the Mongol fleet. The ships that were not destroyed by the storm were forced to retreat, and many Mongol soldiers who survived the tempest were killed or captured by the samurai. As in the first invasion, the second disaster was attributed by the Japanese to the kamikaze, the divine wind, that, according to popular belief, had been sent by the gods to protect Japan. The defeat was a devastating blow to Kublai Khan's ambitions and marked the end of his attempts to conquer Japan. The two failed attempts to invade Japan had a significant impact on both the Mongol Empire and Japan. For Kublai Khan, the defeats represented a severe setback in his expansionist campaigns. He had invested enormous resources in the invasions, and the loss of so many ships and soldiers weakened Mongol military power, especially on the naval front. The defeats in Japan also tarnished the Mongols' prestige, demonstrating that the empire was not invincible and halting Kublai's expansionist ambitions. For Japan, the Mongol invasions left a lasting legacy. The success in defending the archipelago against such a powerful invader strengthened Japan's national identity and solidified the reputation of the Kamakura shogunate. The belief in the kamikaze became an important part of Japan's national mythology, with the idea that the country was under the divine protection of the gods. This belief would echo in later periods of Japanese history, particularly during World War II, when suicide pilots adopted the name kamikaze for their missions. Furthermore, the destruction caused by the invasions and the need to strengthen island defenses permanently changed Japan's political and military landscape. The success against the Mongols gave greater power and prestige to the samurai warrior class, which became the backbone of Japanese society in the following decades. One of the most fascinating aspects of Kublai Khan's reign was the contact between the Mongol Empire and the West, exemplified by the visit of the Venetian merchant Marco Polo to Kublai's court. Marco Polo arrived in China in 1275, accompanied by his father and uncle, experienced merchants seeking business opportunities in the East. What began as a commercial expedition became one of the most famous travel narratives in history, when Marco Polo began to serve in Kublai Khan's court for several years. Marco Polo extensively documented the magnificence of Kublai's court, the administrative organization of the empire, and the wonders of China, such as the use of paper money and the functioning of a vast trade and infrastructure network, far superior to what was known in Europe at the time. His observations about the wealth, trade, and cultural life of China under the Yuan dynasty helped build the myth of the East as a land of fabulous riches, something that would later inspire the European Renaissance and the desire to establish direct trade routes with Asia. While Kublai Khan consolidated his power in China, he also attempted to expand the empire into Southeast Asia, but these attempts resulted in significant failures. Southeast Asia, with its dense jungles, mountains, and tropical climate, proved to be a formidable challenge for the Mongols, who were accustomed to the vast open plains of Central Asia. Kublai launched 3 invasion attempts against Vietnam, then governed by the Tran dynasty, between 1257 and 1288. Although the early campaigns achieved initial success, the Vietnamese practiced effective guerrilla tactics, ambushing Mongol forces in the jungles and using the terrain to their advantage. The Mongols, unfamiliar with the conditions of Southeast Asia, suffered heavy losses. The final attempt by Kublai to subjugate Vietnam in 1288 ended in disaster when the Mongol navy was destroyed at the Battle of Bac Dang River, where the Vietnamese, led by General Tran Hung Dao, used submerged traps to defeat the invading fleet. This failure marked the end of Mongol ambitions in Vietnam. Another significant effort by Kublai was the attempt to invade the island of Java in present-day Indonesia in 1293. Kublai aimed to subjugate the Majapahit kingdom, which controlled much of the region. The expedition faced serious challenges, including supply problems, unfamiliar terrain, and adverse climates. Although the Mongols successfully landed and temporarily subjugated parts of the island, the Javanese forces eventually expelled them, forcing the Mongols to retreat. These failures in Southeast Asia weakened the Mongol military reputation and demonstrated the limits of their ability to operate in climates and territories that did not favor their combat tactics. In 1294, Kublai Khan died, ending one of the most remarkable reigns in Mongol history. During his later years, Kublai faced serious health problems, exacerbated by old age and grief following the death of his favorite wife and eldest son. He also suffered from severe depression and obesity, which prevented him from maintaining the same energy and vigor as in his earlier years. After the death of Kublai Khan in 1294, the Mongol Empire began to fragment even more evidently. Although Kublai was the last great Khan to have authority over the entire empire, his death accelerated the division among the different Khanates that made up the vast Mongol territory. The empire, once unified under Genghis Khan and his early successors, became a confederation of semi-independent states, each ruled by a Khan with his own interests. The main Khanates, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China, began to operate increasingly independently. While they were nominally still part of the Mongol Empire, these political entities acted autonomously and rarely cooperated with one another. The lack of strong central leadership and internal disputes among the descendants of Genghis Khan contributed to the gradual disintegration of the empire. Rivalries among the Khanates, along with internal economic and political problems, prevented any attempt at reunification. The growing influence of local powers and external invasions accelerated the collapse of Mongol authority in many regions, transforming what had been the largest empire in history into several politically independent and weakened entities. The Golden Horde, which controlled the lands of Russia and the steppes north of the Black and Caspian Seas, began to face a series of internal problems after the 14th century. Founded by Batu Khan, the Golden Horde ruled vast regions of Eurasia, demanding tribute from the Russian principalities that lived under its domination. However, by the mid-14th century, the Golden Horde began to decline. Internal divisions among Mongol leaders, power struggles, and a series of weak rulers weakened the cohesion of the Khanate. Additionally, epidemics such as the Black Death devastated the population of the Golden Horde and its territories, further destabilizing the region. At the same time, the Russian principalities, led by the Grand Duchy of Moscow, began to challenge Mongol authority. In 1380, the Golden Horde suffered a significant defeat at the Battle of Kulikovo, when the forces of Dmitry Donskoy defeated the Mongol army. Although the Golden Horde was able to partially restore its control for a time, the defeat symbolized the beginning of Russian independence and the decline of Mongol power in the region. In the following decades, the Golden Horde fragmented into several smaller khanates, such as the Crimean Khanate and the Kazan Khanate, and was progressively disintegrated until it lost complete control over Russian lands. This weakening paved the way for the rise of Moscow as the new regional power. The Ilkhanate, established by Hulagu Khan in the 13th century, ruled Persia, modern-day Iran, Iraq, and parts of Anatolia and the Caucasus. Under the early Ilkhans, the Ilkhanate prospered and established a strong administration, especially under the reign of Ghazan Khan, 1295–1304, who converted to Islam and brought a period of relative stability and prosperity. However, after the death of Ghazan and his successor, Oljaitu, the Ilkhanate began to decline. Internal power struggles among Mongol factions, the fragmentation of its government, and the lack of a strong leader resulted in a series of political crises. The Ilkhanate also faced external invasions, particularly from the Mamluks of Egypt, who had become a rival force in the region. The death of Abu Sa'id in 1335, the last strong ruler of the Ilkhanate, left the state without a direct heir, triggering a civil war and total fragmentation. Various rival factions claimed power, and the Ilkhanate split into small independent states that vied for control of the territory. This disintegration allowed other regional powers, such as the Timurids and the Safavids, to take control of the region in the following decades. While the Mongol Khanates in Russia and Persia faced their own challenges, the Yuan dynasty, ruled by the descendants of Kublai Khan in China, also began to face serious internal difficulties. The Red Turban Rebellion, which began in 1351, was one of the largest and most significant insurrections against Mongol rule and signaled the beginning of the collapse of the Yuan dynasty. The Yuan dynasty had been widely unpopular among the Han Chinese majority, who resented foreign rule. The combination of high taxes, natural disasters, famine, and corruption in the Yuan administration created fertile ground for peasant revolts. The Red Turban Rebellion was led by religious and peasant groups that opposed Mongol economic and political oppression. As the rebellion spread, various local military factions, many led by peasant armies, began to gain power. One of the most prominent leaders of the rebellion was Zhu Yuanzhang, who initially fought as part of the rebel forces but eventually took control of the revolution. The Red Turban Rebellion dealt a decisive blow to the Yuan dynasty, which proved unable to control the widespread rebellion. The weakening of central Mongol authority in China created a power vacuum that facilitated the rise of Zhu Yuanzhang and the eventual fall of the Yuan regime. In 1368, after years of rebellions and instability, the Yuan dynasty finally collapsed. Zhu Yuanzhang, leader of the Red Turban Rebellion and now a powerful military commander, marched on the Mongol capital in Beijing and deposed the last Yuan emperor, Togon Timur. With the fall of the Yuan dynasty, Zhu established the Ming dynasty, proclaiming himself Emperor Hongwu. The fall of the Yuan dynasty was a turning point in Chinese history. Under Mongol rule, China had been integrated into the vast Mongol Empire, but the foreign government and unpopular economic policies had generated significant resentment among the Han population. The rise of the Ming dynasty represented a return to native Chinese rule, with an emphasis on Confucianism and the strengthening of central administration. After the fall of Beijing, the Mongols were pushed back to the Mongolian steppes. Although the Yuan dynasty continued to exist nominally as the Northern Yuan dynasty, it lost much of its power and influence. The Ming dynasty consolidated its control over China, initiating a period of reconstruction and prosperity that would last for centuries. With the collapse of the Yuan dynasty, the Mongol Empire, which had been the largest contiguous land empire in history, came to an end as a centralized power. The independent Khanates continued to exist for some time, but the period of Mongol hegemony in the world had come to a close. During the late 14th century, the warrior-conqueror Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, emerged as a new devastating force in Central Asia, representing a significant threat to the remaining Mongol Khanates. Although Timur considered himself an heir to Genghis Khan, he was not a direct descendant, but his rise to power in the Chagatai Khanate in 1370 marked the beginning of his campaigns of conquest, which threatened the successor states of the Mongol Empire. Timur quickly established his control over the Chagatai Khanate, where he consolidated his rule over Central Asia. He then launched military expeditions against various regional powers, including the Ilkhanate, the Golden Horde, and other areas formerly controlled by the Mongols. His campaigns were marked by extreme violence and destruction, including the annihilation of entire cities. In 1395, Timur invaded the Golden Horde, devastating its lands and further weakening its power. Timur's campaign virtually dismantled the central authority of the Golden Horde, which was already facing internal divisions. Additionally, Timur marched against the Ilkhanate and the Ottoman Empire, devastating Persia and Mesopotamia and weakening the heirs of the former Mongol conquests. Through his campaigns, Timur caused widespread destruction in Mongol territories, accelerating the collapse of their khanates. Although he did not declare himself a new Khan, Timur played a significant role in the fragmentation of the remnants of the Mongol Empire, and his death in 1405 marked the end of his brief military empire. The final collapse of the Golden Horde occurred in the early 16th century. The Horde, which had dominated Russia and parts of Eastern Europe for more than 2 centuries, suffered decades of fragmentation after the defeat at the Battle of Kulikovo and Timur's devastating attacks in the late 14th century. By the 15th century, the Golden Horde had divided into several smaller states, known as Khanates, including the Crimean Khanate, the Kazan Khanate, and the Astrakhan Khanate. These Khanates continued to exist for some time, but the central authority of the Golden Horde was irreparably weakened. In 1502, the Crimean Khanate, led by Khan Mehmed Giray, invaded and defeated the remaining forces of the Golden Horde. This event marked the death of the last Khan of the Golden Horde and the definitive end of Mongol power in Russia and the regions north of the Black Sea. With the fall of the Golden Horde, the Muscovite state, under the leadership of Ivan III and his successors, emerged as the dominant power in the region, consolidating its control over the former territories of the Horde and expanding its influence. The Ilkhanate, which had ruled Persia since the conquest of Hulagu Khan, went into rapid decline after the death of Abu Sa'id in 1335, who was the last great ruler to maintain control over the territory. Without a clear heir, the Ilkhanate gradually fragmented into smaller states and rival factions, unable to maintain political and military cohesion. The absence of a strong central government after 1335 led to the formation of several factions that fought for power in Persia. Many of the local rulers declared their independence, and the region quickly disintegrated into small kingdoms, making it easier for outside powers to invade. The weakening of the Ilkhanate also paved the way for the rise of new powers in the region, such as the Timurids, led by Timur, who conquered large areas of Persia in the late 14th century. Other states, such as the Kharanids and Jalayirids, also benefited from the collapse of the Ilkhanate, taking control of various parts of Persia and the Caucasus. By 1357, the Ilkhanate had disappeared as a cohesive political entity, marking the end of Mongol rule in Persia and paving the way for the rise of new empires in the region in the following decades. The Chagatai Khanate, which ruled Central Asia and parts of Turkestan, was one of the last surviving parts of the Mongol Empire. Founded by Chagatai, the son of Genghis Khan, the Khanate remained a political entity for centuries, despite internal fragmentation and external invasions. During the 15th century, the Chagatai Khanate split into two: the western portion, known as Mogulistan, and the eastern portion, which continued to be ruled by Chagatai's descendants. These divisions weakened the Khanate, and the territory was continually threatened by emerging powers such as the Timurids and later the Uzbeks. The final portion of the Chagatai Khanate continued to exist in the Fergana Valley until the end of the 17th century, but its political structures had already disintegrated. By 1700, the Chagatai Khanate had completely dissolved, being absorbed by the new Central Asian states such as the Khanates of Bukhara and Khiva. The dissolution of the Chagatai Khanate marked the end of the last remaining parts of the old Mongol Empire. officially closing the chapter of Mongol hegemony in Central Asia. The Mongol Empire, despite its collapse and fragmentation, left a profound legacy in world history. The expansion of the Mongols connected East and West in unprecedented ways, establishing trade and communication routes that shaped the world for centuries. The Silk Road, which flourished under Mongol rule, facilitated the exchange of goods, cultures, ideas, and technologies between Europe, China, and the Middle East. Culturally, the Mongol Empire was responsible for the spread of different religions, including Islam, Christianity, and Buddhism, across its vast territory. The Mongols were generally tolerant of the religions of the peoples they conquered, encouraging pluralism and cultural exchange. Military, the Mongol Empire revolutionized warfare with its cavalry tactics, rapid mobility, and strategic coordination. Its campaigns of conquest are studied to this day by historians and military strategists. The administrative structure that Genghis Khan implemented, based on merit and military organization, served as a model for many subsequent empires. Politically, the Mongol Empire paved the way for the emergence of new states and empires that inherited its territories and methods of governance. The collapse of the empire gave rise to a number of nations that would shape the future of Asia, Russia, and the Middle East, and its influence on the course of world history remains evident to this day.